Hey folks, Stephen Gray here. This is a little sort of explanatory note, very brief, just before we get into the interview with Marguerite Rigoglioso. Uh, you will hear on my voice, not on hers. Hers is fine, but on my voice, you're going to hear this weird artifact. It's kind of bizarre. I've done a lot of Zoom things, and I've never experienced this before. It's like another channel coming through or something. Anyway, I thought it was a really interesting interview in which Marguerite explained herself quite well to some of my challenging questions. So didn't want to waste it, but just giving you a heads up that you're going to hear this. Marguerite kind of playfully suggested it. It's as if a voice from the other side was trying to come through. Anything's possible, but there you go. Greetings, everybody. Stephen Gray here. This is the Stephen Gray Vision YouTube channel that you may have seen some of other interviews of before. Welcome back. This series is about helping humanity straighten up and fly right, to put it in a kind of a glib way, I suppose. But I'm sure you know what I mean, that we are in a deep doo-doo at this time, and we need visions, we need prayers, we need intelligence, we need helpful ideas to help us move forward. And that's what this series is about. Obviously having a connection to psychedelics in general, but not necessarily as the central concern, because the central concern indeed is this consciousness, this needed consciousness transformation. So, and by the way, these YouTube videos are also available as audio podcasts on Anchor.fm. That's ANCHOR.fm. So, delighted to again meet my guest. We had Marguerite Rigoglioso at our Spirit Plant Medicine Conference about 5 or 6 years ago. And we are back again because she has a new book out. And we're going to be talking about that. And we've both agreed, actually, that we're going to have some free-ranging conversation as well. So we're hoping it'll go in some spontaneous directions. So first of all, a quick bio of Marguerite. She has a PhD and is known as the foremost authority on the history of virgin birth. And has taught graduate and undergraduate courses in both the United States and the United Kingdom. She's the director of her own esoteric school, Seven Sisters Mystery School, dedicated to restoring knowledge about the sacred feminine and to empowering people in their non-traditional spiritual journeys. She's the author of The Cult of Divine Birth in Ancient Greece and Virgin Mother Goddess of Antiquity. Her most recent book, the one we're going to be focusing on more so, is The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception, Mary and the Lineage of Virgin Birth, or Births, pardon me. So, welcome, Marguerite.
Thank you, Stephen. It's
Good to
very
have.
nice to be here with you.
Yeah, back together again, so to speak. Although we were in the same room, and I believe had quite a few conversations while you were up here in Vancouver, whenever that was, about 2015 or 16. I
Yeah.
don't remember exactly. Yeah. So, excuse me, I got a bit of a frog here. So, yes, let's get into it. Um, Very interesting, from my point of view, controversial book. Well, okay, let's just go spontaneous. Let me ask you right away. Have you had flack? Have you been getting critical critique about your contention regarding virgin birth?
Right, that it was a real thing, that Mary actually did it. Not only that did she do it, but many women in antiquity and going on into the present day have done it. Have I gotten flack? Not really, you know?
Really interesting, yeah.
Yeah, you know why? Because the people who are not really that into it just go the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really deal with it. And I also think that in terms of academia, my sense is that the work is so well researched and so um, credibly documented and carefully, the argument is so carefully constructed that they can't necessarily poke holes in it
Mm.
based on shoddy scholarship. So they just kind of go the other way. So mainly what I've been encountering are people who are totally into this topic and for whom these books that I've written seem to be a revelation for them and an explanation of either their own inner knowing or some experiences they've had.
Hmm. Okay, so this could fan out in a bunch of directions, uh, but I'd like to get into that sort of the veracity issue a little bit more. So this is for me, from me coming from a, definitely a layperson's perspective. I'm not an academic. I haven't done extensive research on this or the history of religion or Christianity or any of that stuff, but I have read a number of books. There was one book, for example. This is leading to a question. There was one book, and I read it about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I just cannot remember the name of the book or the author. And I just looked around recently trying to find it so I could reference it to you. This gentleman grew up devoutly Christian, went to a Christian university, and got into this field. I'm not sure of the title of the field, perhaps something to do with historicity, but it's the field of looking at translations of ancient manuscripts and texts and so on. And he said that, although he's still a devout Christian, he became increasingly surprised at the difficulty in pinning down any reliable information about those times. And then he went through how that happens. And so, for example, as far as I know, and then again, you're the scholar and I'm the layperson here, so correct me on any of this. As far as I know, none of the disciples, Jesus's disciples, were writing anything down at the time. Paul didn't write anything down for 30 or 40 years, as far as I know. And then from there, it just goes through a convoluted series of, for example, I think it was that guy that says that Paul maybe didn't even do his own writing. A lot of people in his position had scribes. And then most people in those days were illiterate. And so a letter would be handwritten, delivered to, say, the Corinthians or whatever. And then somebody who maybe was semi-literate would read it to the congregation. And then people would sort of pass it around word of mouth in primarily oral cultures, etc. So there's that level of it way back then. And then from there, the Bible is, I read recently, exists or has existed in 600 languages. So there's all kinds of translation involved. Then the church gets their hands on things and they decide what they think they like and don't like. The Council of Nicaea in 325 drummed out reincarnation, for example, right? And then simple mistakes. You could make a mistake of translation or scribing on one word and it can change the meaning of something altogether. And then for one last little bit before I turn this over to you, after this bit of a ramble, I was looking at some information about a series called Bible Secrets Revealed from the History Channel. I don't know how reliable it is, but they did quote, so-called authorities and whatnot. And they say that the Gospels were written anonymously. Like they didn't even use their names, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So in any case, that long ramble, pardon me, is all about asking you the question, how do we really know, other than, word of mouth or people that are already true believers, that anything coming from 2,000 years ago can be counted on? I mean, I can't remember what I ate for dinner 2 weeks ago.
Right. Well, there are, what I do in this book, The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception, is I mainly focus on one gospel that's more of the suppressed variety. It's known as the apocryphal genre. It's called the Infancy Gospel of James, as we know it, but its original name was The Birth of Mary. So this is what my book is a deep dive into, to really tease out what is in that gospel. Now, for that gospel, I relied on the writings of various scholars like Ronald Hawk and Ali Cattouz and some of the researchers that she draws on to try to get as clear and original a picture of this gospel as could have truly existed from the very beginning, which might have been as early as really the claim in the gospel is that this was written, at the time of the conception of Jesus, the birth of Jesus, and that type of thing. Scholars looking at it say that, well, it could be as early as 150 years BC, or excuse me, AD, or even earlier. And some of them say, no, it was later. So there's debate. There's debate. One of the things that I do, though, with this gospel is that I believe I give it credence by ferreting out what all of the little signs and symbols and significators mean by cross-referencing it with the tremendous research that I've done about divine birth across the ancient Mediterranean world. Once you start doing that, as I do in the book, it fleshes out this gospel and it makes it even more credible than, a little nibbly academic might be thinking about it in his hovel, So we are doing the best we can in a scholarly way to assess these documents. One of the things that I talk about is how some of these scholars get to exactly what you were saying, which is that there has been tampering with this and other gospels. And so they aim to show how this tampering actually took place, where, and why it might have been tampered in this way. And so by doing this, you can get at a very early rendering of this gospel that is even a little bit different from the version that we have now. And that gets to key things, such as that Mary may never have left the temple to conceive Jesus and go off with Joseph, as has been said. She may have stayed in the temple in the earliest versions of this gospel, and so forth. So, we're doing our best with what we have, and we're not, though, just relying on academics or documents for this information. We're also tuning into deep levels of intuition and alternative ways of knowing. And so, for example, for some of the material that I study about Mary, I look to that of a late Hindu saint named Sri Kaleshwar, who claims to have past life recall of the lives of these people, but also he acquired these ancient palm leaf manuscripts from India, which apparently also say quite a bit about Jesus and practices that would have been used and so forth. So the picture is a lot bigger than we think, and the resources that we have to use in evaluating these documents and these potential histories is more vast than just what is being said in this document from whatever year.
Well, I'd like to ask you more about that document and its source as well, or its origins, but also let me ask you about that, because I had another question in mind, but we'll get back to it. So what do we know? I mean, for example, as far as I know from this relatively small amount of reading I have done, the Nag Hammadi documents, also known as the Gnostic Gospels, have been carefully dated and studied so that they know, that they were carbon dated to the right era, and they know that I think it was Aramaic that they were written in. The way it was written is the way it was written at, whenever that was, not too long in that next 100 or 2 years after the death of Jesus. There was that way of writing. So they validated that. So what do we know about how we can validate this? What's it called again? The
The
infancy of
Infancy Gospel of James.
the infancy
Yes,
gospel. Yes, right.
yes. So there is a book about it by Ronald Hawk, and others, though there are others who have written about it, which gives a very good assessment of this gospel. Its style, its dating, its authorship, and so forth. And there are varying arguments that scholars have about what is the date of this document, who actually could have written it. Could it have been James? And if so, is this James one of the first original sons of Joseph by a previous marriage before he was connected with Mary as a young girl, and so forth? So the original of this is, I think, called the Bodmer Papyrus, which goes back. Again, people are not exactly sure. Is it 150 AD or when? I believe the original documentations would have been in Greek. And there were numbers of these papyri that were found and then sort of re-emerged in medieval libraries. So we have versions of this manuscript or pieces of this manuscript all over in different libraries. And this is how they've piece them together to compile one major document, which I think Ronald Hawk does a very good job of in his book about this. So, I mean, that's giving you a little taste of it. I'm not sure if it's exactly answering your question, but, there are many questions about it. But again, if it is indeed written by the James, who is one of the sons of Joseph by a previous marriage, these events are from an eyewitness, okay? And from somebody who would have been very close to Mother Mary and her story and the events that took place with her conception and afterward, and as they were going to the census and fleeing Herod and all that sort of thing. So it's very, very interesting. And as I said, my work, I believe, even validates this document more than it has been, because I am able to show that it is revealing hidden secrets that were really just known by the women's mystery traditions of the time. And, like, for example, that why does Anne conceive Mary? First of all, that's an interesting piece of the story. Why does Anne conceive Mary at a laurel tree? And I go off on a whole explanation, because this is showing us that she was a woman, a holy woman of power, connected with oracular abilities, because the laurel tree is a symbol that relates to ancient Delphi, where there was a great practice of women oracles and, as I show, divine birth priestesses. You see? So these are the types of things that I'm able to do in this book, I think in a very readable way, because people have been saying they're able to read it very quickly, they're able to understand it. Unlike my other books, which are highly, highly scholarly, highly, highly documented, I really wanted to make this readable. And something that could go down with a spoonful of sugar, so to speak, by any lay person who wanted to pick it up.
Yes, well, I found it was accessible that way, sure. Okay, now this is the more, I don't know, challenging or controversial kind of area that I wanted to get into a bit. And excuse me if I don't articulate this particularly intelligently or coherently, but I'm going to do my best. I'm speaking now on behalf of my imagined audience, or some of that audience, that are likely to be skeptical of this just because it's not part of their world, not part of our conditioning, training, etc., in this particular kind of world that we've grown up in, and so on and so on. It's to do with this notion of the virgin birth. And so one question is, one place where my mind goes into this, and I guess I'm going to have to spin out two or three possible questions here. Uh, why is it? Give me a moment to work through this before you answer, please. Um, why is it important to stress, excuse me, divine birth for one thing? And one of the this is more of a comment to go with the question. One reason that twigs something in me is because we know that the Catholic Church has been anti-women and anti-sex, and so the idea of a virgin birth almost by implication, I don't know, maybe you would completely agree with this, but it almost implies that there's something dirty and wrong with sex. You know, that it's superior to have borne a child divinely without having had sex. So that's one area of kind of questioning that I have. You know, why is it important to emphasize that? I mean, would it be any different if Jesus, if we found out for a fact, you know, somehow that will never happen, of course, but if we somehow found out for a fact that no, indeed, although perhaps there has been a lot of divine birth historically, but in this particular case, Mary was in a culture that was very, very conservative, and you weren't allowed to have premarital sex, and she did, and so she made up a story about it, you know, that fit in with people's general beliefs. So why is it important to stress that Mary gave birth to Jesus without having had sexual intercourse to do so, at least not with a human being anyway?
Right. Well, you know, before I wrote about Mary, I started researching priestesses of ancient Greece. And I had an intuition that I had received in a downpour of intuition that virgin birth was something that women were actually doing. But before I even looked at the situation of Mary, I just started looking across ancient Greece and beyond, the ancient Mediterranean world. And I found tremendous amounts of evidence that women were practicing this technology in a variety of different ways that actually devolved over time. And that is the content of my first two books, as you mentioned, The Cult of Divine Birth in Ancient Greece and Virgin Mother Goddesses of Antiquity, where I talk about that it was the basis of the Eleusinian mysteries, and it was the basis of all of these stories about the rapes of the maidens and, you know, this, that, and the other thing. So it's not that Mother Mary was an isolated incident by any means. I started finding a plethora of these kinds of stories and these ancient beliefs that women could conceive in this way. We find it in Plutarch. We find it in the ancient Egyptian material. We find it in those Gnostic Gospels that you're talking about. There are fragments here and there that I draw into my research that show us that the ancient ones believed that divine birth was possible. Now, what I discovered in uncovering all this research and putting it together is that there was a reason why this technology was used and why virginity was a critical component for this particular technology. The technology was aiming at bringing a very high level consciousness being to the planet. And it was what I find is that it was understood in antiquity that this type of a being could only come through a divine conception with a woman who had not had sexual intercourse with any kind of male creature, be it an embodied human or a god in the astral plane. And that the reason virginity was needed for this was as soon as a male energy would come into her body, she would start getting involved in that man's karma, that man's energy, that man's problems, and so forth and so on. She, in order to bring a super high being in, she needed to be extremely holy, pure, connected, and empowered herself. And she needed to not involve her sacred womb with anything else, okay? So that she could really tune in and conceive through what these are called light conceptions, and conceive these children from the realms of divine light. Okay, these are the types of things that people can see and understand when they go into medicine sessions. And I've had, sacred hallucinogenic journeys. I've had people come to me and weeping, thanking me for making sense of either experiences they had under sacred medicines, or knowings that they understood under sacred medicines, and so forth. So virginity was a technology in one of the phases of this holy practice of women. Okay, there were also other phases of it that did involve sexuality and union between males and females, but we're talking about, for women, what's called a siddhic ability, a siddhi. The siddhi is the miraculous ability, the types of things that are documented throughout India and many other places, where male and other saints can, do things that are counter-biological. They can cut off their hands and reattach them, pull out their bowels and put them back in, die and come back to life. It had been done before, before Jesus, and so forth and so on. These types of miraculous abilities that really are documented, even into this present day. So just because a divine conception without male sperm seems counter-biological does not mean that it couldn't be practiced if we understand it as, again, a siddhic ability. So these are the areas that I start going into to address people's concerns, like, well, that's not possible. You need sperm and egg to have a conception. Well, no, not according to these ancient testimonies, and even coming more and more into present time, where I have actually known women who have had conceptions without male sperm.
Fascinating. Well, you made a pretty good case for it there, I would say. And, in terms of what you were talking about, the cities, as far as I'm concerned, the mere fact that anything exists is a miracle beyond description anyway. So anything is possible.
That's right.
That's
right.
Yeah, but if you don't mind, I'd like to pursue the sort of skeptical inquiry a little bit longer.
Sure.
I mentioned this History Channel series, and one of the things that was addressed there, and in a couple of other sources as well, was the translation of the word that refers to virgin birth. You've used the word a number of times in the book, parthenos or parthenogenesis.
Yes.
And so this one story, I'm kind of looking away from the camera for a minute, because it says here, at issue is the word virgin, alma, used in Isaiah 7:14 in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that became the normative version of the Hebrew Bible among Jews in the late Second Temple period. Alma gets translated as parthenos, which means young woman or maiden or virgin. However, in other instances of the word alma, in that source, the word gets translated as a synonym of young woman, and it kind of goes on from there. But so what about that,
Right.
use of that word
Right.
that could be interpreted in different ways?
I talk about this extensively in the Cult of Divine Birth in ancient Greece, looking particularly at the word parthenos, okay, which comes from the Greek. It means parthenogenesis. Parthenos can mean, again, like you're saying, a number of things. It can mean young maiden. It can mean virgin. But it can also mean an older woman who has remained a virgin, or sometimes who has conceived a child, but divinely, you see. So what I end up realizing is that parthenos is one of those terms that was a marker for a divine birth priestess. It wasn't just a maiden or just a virgin, or, because there are these contradictory definitions of it. But when you understand parthenos as priestess of divine birth, all of those contradictory definitions come together, and you're like, oh. And I think alma can be another case of that. Paida in Greek is another term that gets used for Mary. both Parthenos and Paida, as young girl and so forth. So these words had multiple meanings. But what I do find is that for women practicing the purest form of this, yes, virginity was part of that Parthenos quality or way of living. Okay, so this is starting to get into what you're saying. And again, I would refer people to the Cult of Divine Birth in ancient Greece and look up Parthenos in the index and go look up what I say about it, because there's a much more intricate and nuanced argument that we don't really have time to go into here, but this is sort of getting in the vicinity of it.
Sure. Yes. Well, those who are interested certainly have these sources to go to, and that's good. Still working with this theme of, asking you to, I don't know, clarify and explain and justify to some degree. This is not, what I'm about to ask or say now is, I wouldn't say it's an argument or an objection to the potential veracity or historical truth of, or even current truth of the potential for divine birth. Just this, why is it, and let me spin this one out for a minute again, please. Why is it superior? You a few moments ago you gave an explanation about why it needed to be a virgin and all that kind of thing. So the question, which I'm going to follow up with a little brief anecdote, is why is that necessarily superior or purer or more powerful than an ideal connection, directly between a man and a woman? And where that question is coming from is, I believe it's called the Mahanirvana Tantra. Have you ever heard of it?
No, but yes.
It was a Buddhist practice from, I think, the 11th century, somewhere around there in India. It involved cannabis, or a drink made from cannabis, and it involved Buddhist yogini or yogin and yogini, who presumably were well trained first, and then there was like weeks of preparation for them, fasting, meditation, isolation, etc. And then they came together in the temple with the support of monks and so on, and this drink. And what is said about that, the writing from the time actually says that when that happened, the purpose of it was nothing to do with what we would call sexual intercourse in the conventional sense. It was about using that potential of opening and surrendering, combining how, as I imagine we don't need to get into details of our personal history here, but surely both of us have had at least one or two orgasms that took us, in a sense, out of ourselves in our lives. And so when you combine that incredible amplifying power of a strong cannabis drink like that, what they said was that the purpose of this was divine union. And so they both, in a sense, became God. So I guess my question again is, why would something like that be any less powerful and potential for bringing in a divine being than not having an actual connection with a human being?
Wow, first of all, that is so fascinating to hear about that. I had not known or read about that, but it makes total sense to me. I don't think that it's any more or less pure than parthenogenesis. I think it's just an alternative technology. So I do think that a very high level of sex magic could happen with people who have really purified, really done their work, and then go into this incredible expanded state of consciousness. Yes, that I think that was also going on in very ancient times as well. And I think it's kind of like the other end of the spectrum so let's say a continuum of sacred sexual conception practices. On the one end is parthenogenesis, and on the other is high tantra, right? I think those are both equal. The thing about parthenogenesis is that it harkens back to what may have been original human form and original human methods of reproduction prior to gender splitting. And that brings us back very ancient times, pre-Platonic, where Plato talks about, the female and the male were once one. I mean, he talks about that. And then they split, and then they've always been longing for each other again. Parthenogenesis returns us almost to the original divine human template, because in some of these, one of the Gnostic stories, we're told that the woman does, by doing this, she has to generate sexual energy and sexual heat, and she has to become androgynous. And so as to love herself so that she can conceive. So she's in her own vessel, taking up and doing what this couple is doing, but both very high level. The very interesting thing about parthenogenesis, which I think is why it has partly been veiled, is it is the way in which the woman can become one with the goddess source of all creation. That, as patriarchy progressed, was a very progressively threatening idea. Therefore, it's one of many reasons why a veil would have been going over the possibility of parthenogenesis, and then it became made impossible by the medical establishment. It became reduced in this weird kind of shriveled up way by Christianity, to, well, a virgin just all of a sudden got pregnant, and virgins are better, you know what I mean? And sex is bad, like it's so complicated, right? I'm trying to get at all of these things, but I'm trying to return us to this original idea, because what I talk about in all of my books really is that in order to engender parthenogenesis within yourself, you have to become one with the very erotic nature of feminine universe.
Beautiful. Yeah, well said. Okay, so yeah, we could explore that more, but I think I've tired myself out of asking skeptical questions, and now I'd like to ask you, because I know you know something about this, and I know that you have worked with psychedelics a bunch in your life, which was why we invited you to the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, because of your connection to psychedelics. So I know this is an equally difficult area to make reliable, unassailable claims about. But what would you say about the possibility or likelihood that psychedelics were involved? That Mary might have, had, been using a plant medicine, a visionary plant medicine, or that, that they would have been around her, or it would have been part of this, of the way to, because as you know, one term for psychedelics is non-specific or unspecific amplifiers, right? So whatever, if you're already a sort of an advanced yogini, so to speak, and you can enter into deep egoless spaces, then presumably the psychedelic medicines could even deepen that or open up more. So do we know anything that's, I don't know, substantial about the potential of those being around her world? Or
Yes.
their world?
Yes, and this is precisely where the infancy gospel of James, on which I base my book, comes in. There are two references, one to Anne, Mary's mother's conception of Mary, which was parthenogenetic, which very few people know, but there it is. And one was with Mary's conception of Jesus. With Anne, once again, we have her sitting at that laurel tree and, quote, resting. So I go into this big discussion of this, that first of all, laurel was a known hallucinogen in the ancient world. And that is partly why it was at Delphi. It was probably one of the sacred medicines that the Delphic oracle used to engender her open state of consciousness. And the idea of Anne resting is a signifier that these women are going into an expanded state, a rest state or an expanded state. And I talk about numerous instances of this throughout the ancient Greek legendary world, meaning history that has actually been forgotten, that these women would get drowsy or go into a sleep, or go, after ingesting something, a cup of something or whatever. So that's where we see it with Anne. And so I make the case that Anne was probably using a sacred medicine to amplify her experience. And with Mary, go ahead.
Excuse me one second. For people watching this, could you please explain a little bit about who Anne is or was?
So Anne is one of the opening characters of this gospel. She and her consort Joachim are elder people. They have not had children, and they're upset about this. And they both go into a deep ritual, and Anne finally does conceive, and Anne conceives Mary. So Hannah, is the mother of Mary, the Virgin Mother of Mary. And we only see Anne mentioned, in legend and so forth. Any mentions in the church, the Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox tradition, are from this gospel, you see. And so Anne is the mother of Mary. So this is telling us that there's a lineage of divine birth. Okay. And she references Sarah, the mother of the biblical Isaac, who also gave birth divinely in her elder years. All right. So these elder women knew how to conceive divinely, and they are able to achieve it later in their life. Mary, as an alma, as the young woman, as the parthenos, is able to do it right off the bat, because number one, she's divinely born, so she's already a divine being, a very high level avatar. And number two, she's had many, many lifetimes to perfect this. And number three, she's trained by the Hebrew virgins from the time of infancy. And number four, she probably is using medicines, because what we hear in this gospel is that she ate like a dove, received the food from a heavenly messenger. Dove, I go on to an entire dissertation about how that is referencing ancient hallucinogenic priestesshoods and so forth. Ate the food from a heavenly messenger is another reference to some kind of sacred substance that opens her consciousness to be able to see angelic beings, masters, the whole shebang on the other side. Okay, so those are just some of the clues that we have about the use of sacred medicines just from Anne and Mary. And then again, in ancient Greece, I talk about this extensively in the Cult of Divine Birth in ancient Greece. And then in my book, Virgin Mother Goddesses of Antiquity, I talk extensively about how the koukeon was the medicine created by women and used by all the initiates in the Eleusinian mysteries to go into a high altered state of consciousness in which they experienced or witnessed divine birth, that there was some kind of divine conception ritual that was a part of that. And I would really love for academics to pay a little bit more attention to that book, which is quite an extensive analysis of what really went on in those Eleusinian mysteries. But again, nobody's touched it in the academic world. And, anyway, perhaps just as well. But sacred medicines are all over the place in antiquity, and they're all over the place associated with women, and I show associated with divine birth as an amplifier for this practice.
Yeah, very interesting. So I can't resist one more sort of fact-checking question, though, and I'm sure you'll have an answer for this one. Was not Mary married to Joseph at the time when Jesus was born? And if so, would it not stand to reason that they were having sexual intercourse during that time? And if so, then how could they separate out what was the source of her fertilization?
Well, that's the very fascinating and wonderful thing about this infancy gospel of James, or Birth of Mary. It is very, very clear that Joseph was never the conjugal husband of Mary. They never got married. He was the guardian. And what I discuss in this book, The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception, is that he, Joachim, Anne's consort, Zechariah, Elizabeth's consort, the Virgin Mother of John the Baptist, and Abraham, the consort of Sarah, were never the conjugal husbands of these women. They never had sex with them. If at all, it might have happened in a very strict, ritualized capacity, maybe with Abraham and Sarah, but the rest of them, it seems likely that these women were lifelong parthenoi, virgins, And their husband, quote, were really just guardian partners who had their back, protected them, helped support them financially, and possibly also energetically. I talk about how they might have been working as a tag team, but completely on the astral realm, because it is very clear in these two gospels that Joachim is in the desert when Anne conceives Mary, and Joseph has gone away on a construction project when Mary conceives Jesus. So this is, I don't think this is something that was like retroactively made up by some writer in the Catholic Church. They were just describing actual authentic practices. And I really tease this out, and I go into the ancient West Asian world, Sumer and those places, Babylonia, to show that there was a historic precedence of women who were not having sex with their consorts. All right. So that's what I'll say about that. Whether Mary and Joseph ever did have sex later is up for grabs, because even in the regular canonical gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where it talks about Jesus's brothers and sisters, it's never clear that those were by Mary and Joseph later having children. In fact, this infancy gospel of James suggests that these were all previous children that Joseph had before he became assigned to be the guardian of Mary, which he did reluctantly, by the way, we find out in this gospel. He was fighting it tooth and nail until finally, in a dream, an angel had to come to him and say, look, buddy, you are with Parthenos, okay? She's conceived divinely. You better go take care of her. And he's like, oh, okay. He's suddenly straightening up and flying right about his assigned role.
Oh, yeah. Well, if it really did happen like that, it certainly puts paid to the sort of fairy tales about, Joseph and Mary, that you get, in the manger and all these things, and the sort of conventional standard for public consumption Christian origin stories, huh?
Right. I'm putting a different deflector on it, a different angle, like saying, okay, it wasn't quite that. Let's look at it that way. And then people might just say, whoa, I get it. Oh, that makes sense. That's really interesting.
So, let me bring this forward now. So this other, to my mind, big question is, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, like everything about material existence is, it's an incredible, unspeakable mystery and a miracle in any case. So anything is possible. And I have heard some of those same kind of stories about people like Ramana Maharshi or whoever they were that could sort of disappear and appear in another room, and all these kind of things and so on. So I don't question the fact that that's possible. But my question now is, okay, well, a statement and a question. The statement is, I can understand the relevant, this is part of the question, I can understand the relevance of this for now and going forward from the point of view of empowering women, absolutely. But beyond that, and maybe you could elaborate on that anyway, why is this, how and why is this of any value for lay people, so to speak, to know for where we are going as a planet in trouble and what we need to do to straighten up and fly right, as we've been saying here?
Right. Okay. Well, we all need a few good avatars running around again on the planet, don't we? And so if women can resurrect this practice, either on the parthenogenesis side or on the high tantra conception side, and they are then able to pull forth into their bodies higher vibrational intelligence beings. We need those kinds of beings to come onto our plane right now to assist us in elevating up, in evolving. All right. So these technologies being unveiled now, and there is, a simpler one that a man and a regular old man and woman can practice. It's a 2-mantra practice that Sri Kaleshwar retrieved from these ancient palm leaf manuscripts to conceive. You chant this mantra while you are in sexual union. And then the second one is something that the mother will chant during, her conception period, in order to bring in what Kaleshwar called a divine child. So all of these are methods of bringing in higher vibrational beings. Okay, we really need to bring in older souls who really get it now to help infiltrate into and we already have a lot of these people. There are very intelligent people running around. There are starseed, what people are calling star seeds and indigos and all this sort of thing that are coming in willy-nilly, through different kinds of channels, I believe. But I think that putting these technologies in the hands of women once again makes it a more measured, conscious, deliberate practice. And we need to return to these kinds of things. We need to really upgrade our conception practices, experiences, intentions, and souls that are coming in.
Well, it's certainly on this notion of empowering women and women taking their rightful place, so to speak. I certainly have come across a lot of that and resonate with that completely. You've no doubt heard of the the International Council of the 13 Indigenous Grandmothers, and a number of them have said in different ways the same essential thing, which is their visions are telling them that this is the time for the voices of the women to come forward.
That's right.
That the women represent all that's become imbalanced. What's missing in this world is what women understand in the blood, from the earth, so to speak. Yeah.
That's right. And in their wombs.
Yes.
Their wombs are a major portal in their bodies for information, for conception, for creative production, for healing of self and others, and so forth. This is a major, major portal. And that's one of the things that Sri Kaleshwar really brought forth in a big way through acquiring these palm leaf manuscripts and then teaching what he calls the Holy Womb Chakra system and what I call the Holy Womb Chakra teachings. And I've been certified through his lineage to teach this because it's a mantra and yantra practice to really clear out and clean the womb and elevate it back to its rightful place. Yeah, I mean, the Toltecs have been saying through Sergio Magana and others have been saying that we just had the eclipse that marked the move from the third dimension into the fourth dimension and into the sixth sun. So, and he says that what goes along with that is the return of the feminine, just like what you're saying, what these Indigenous grandmothers are saying, and so forth. This is the time. This is what we need, that resurrection of the feminine and that balancing of that energy on the planet.
Absolutely, yeah. My old Buddhist teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, had a term, natural hierarchy, that when there's no power dynamics involved, when ego is not involved, things take their rightful place. And then if you connect that back, for example, to the work of Ryan Eisler, The Chalice and the Blade, you know that one? Yeah, where she talks about how I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name of the city correctly, Catalhayuk, more or less, from Armenia or somewhere in there, Turkey.
Yeah, Turkey, ancient Turkey.
So when they dug up that whole city, what they found was the women's bedroom was always the largest room in the house. And I don't remember all the details. I actually haven't looked at the book for 25 years now. But what has stuck with me is that, they found a variety of evidence, including that one, as well as pottery record that indicated that that this was a matrilineal society, which is to be distinguished from matriarchal. It's not, and that's where natural hierarchy comes in as well, because it's not about one over another. And that's one of, I think, our central problems now, is that maybe men and women both, but certainly men who've been running the world on the material level, don't understand partnership. That was a Ryan Eisler term. The dominator societies versus partnership societies. And in a partnership society, excuse me, women have this exalted place, which is very difficult for men to come to terms with because of this conditioning that if you're not above, you're below, and then you feel lesser, you feel like shit or whatever, right? And so, but it makes sense in that way to honor women in that way, and that's why they were matrilineal, for example, because the women were, as you say, the ones through the womb and so on that were the connecting linkage, right?
And it's so interesting, Steve, because I was very, very involved for a while in the matriarchal studies community and all of that research. And they did reclaim the word matriarchy as meaning mothers from the beginning society, or, not, hey, women who are now abusing men society. Okay. No. But in researching these societies, past and present, I'm, for example, thinking of the Mosu in China, where they were really strong matriarchy for a while, and they had visiting marriages and so forth, where they lived in long houses, and it wasn't dependent on the nuclear family. It was like the mother's family, and then the lovers would come in and out. A man from that society at one of these conferences said, "It's such a great way of life. I mean, we love it." It's such a relief, because the pressure is totally off men to be that artificial kind of King Kong breadwinner that most men cannot even measure up to, whatever that image is anyway. It's a total burden. It's a disheartening kind of situation.
Soul destroying.
It's soul destroying, right? And so matriarchies, when they're in this natural order, it's partnership societies, like Rian Eisler is saying. Men and women have their roles, but it's not based on the nuclear family, you see. It's based on communal kinds of living that spread out the childcare, the financial responsibility, the living situations, everything. And it's much, much healthier. So there have just been so many things that have developed over hundreds and thousands of years that have been negative for us. And we're only starting to recognize this now. And so, I think that once we go into the natural order of things again, everyone's going to relax. People will be like, what were we so worried about anyway? This is way better.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Well, that would be a beautiful place to close up in itself. But I do actually want to have a brief discussion with you about something you said a few moments ago, that we need these avatars. And on one level, maybe I agree with that, but on another level, in my world, people I'm connected to, what we think we're seeing is that the age of the guru is over.
Yes.
And that awakening now is not about having, these great figures that we sort of look up to or whatever, but that there's a mass awakening slowly happening. Yeah.
We are the second coming. We are becoming that guru. It may even be that this divine birth technology is an outdated one in some regards. If we all can give birth to that avatar within,
absolutely,
that is the second coming. That is the divine birth. It's happening now. There's a potential for it to happen en masse.
That feels right. I just got chills all the way down my legs. So that's a beautiful place to end too. But I want to ask you one more question, which I sometimes ask my guests on this program is. And this is an open-ended one, so just whatever you feel like saying about it. Again, prefaced with a statement. It's pretty clear to anyone who's paying attention that we are on a destructive trajectory on this planet, and it doesn't look very hopeful for turning it around quickly, because most people, especially those in charge of government, corporations, and so on, are not seeing anything like a divine potential on this planet. That's the big missing thing, right? That we are part of a divine creation world, and that as you say, we're all God in that sense, or all Buddha, as the Buddhists would say. So given that things look pretty fucking dire, how hopeful are you, or what would you imagine? Have you? I don't even know if you even think like this, but what would you imagine? Is the likelihood, or even the possibility, for say the next 30, 40, 50 years on this planet? Willing to say something about that?
Yeah, I think we're in a pivotal time right now that is going to determine that, but it's a very exciting time. And I think where it's at is not with these leaders on the global scale or in the media or whatever. Where it's at is in each of our hearts and souls, and whether we are connecting with the divine through meditation, through sacred medicine, through communal group, whatever, relating, raising our consciousness, doing our healing, doing our inner healing, coming to self-love. All of those acts are incredibly powerful grains of sand that can get an enormous mountain of sand, that can end up outweighing. And also, one grain of that type of sand is more powerful than tons of that other kind of energy or those other doings. So we have to remember that it doesn't have to become 50-50, like 50% enlightened people, 50% people in the dark. Those people who are really doing this personal awakening, just keep doing it and take heart. Keep doing your daily work. Don't worry so much about what's going on out there. Definitely, my opinion, get off the media, because that is getting you into that cycle of despair and fear and hopelessness and whatnot and so on. And just do the inner work. Be kind and productive in your local area, your family, and so forth. Do what you're called to do, but just keep doing it and focus on that and trust that, and the future will take care of itself.
Now, those are wonderful words to end on. And so let's do that, except that I asked you at the beginning, or before we hit the record button, if you wanted to mention any thing that you'd like people to check out, whether like a website, or,
Yeah,
we know about the books now.
that's right.
Anything else that I can put in my little tiles underneath here?
Sure. Yes. Of course, the books can be purchased wherever books are sold, and they are in print, Audible audio, and Kindle ebook formats. But if you would like to know more about anything I'm talking about, my work with courses in Blessed Mother Mary, the Holy Womb Chakra courses, divine birth, many, many other topics, come to sevensistersmysteryschool.com. And the seven is written out SEVEN. You'll find many resources for yourself, as well as free offerings and events that I always have coming up, cacao ceremonies as a sacred medicinal, a very beautiful way of opening the heart in a safe way, and opening the consciousness. And I do also private one-on-one sessions if you'd like to go deeper, if this has sparked anything and you feel that I could be of service to you. Definitely you can contact me through that site.
Excellent. Okay. Well, this has been very interesting, wouldn't you say?
Yes, yes. Thank you for all of your pointed questions, that, because I think every question needs to be answered or addressed in some way,
Yes,
so that people can evaluate for themselves.
absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, wonderful. And so I'll just wish you well and say thank you.
Thank you.